Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of Fight Chat Friday with TKD Coach Academy, Adrian Byrne and Richie Forde. This week we're going to be looking at the defensive side of the game and the order or hierarchy of the defensive strategies. So if you want to know what the best type of defense is and how to set that up, you definitely want to watch this episode.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Fight Chat Friday. So you just seen there we have our free ebooks on our website, so go check those out if you are interested in ways to get better kicks and also ways to instantly improve your sparring. So all we're looking for is your email address in return so we can send you out some cool news when we have some projects and things like that lined up that will be of benefit to you. So as Adrian alluded to, today's episode is going to be on the defensive side of the game. We're going to look through there's 5 ways that we're going to look at today of how you can defend and not get hit, and maybe the good sides and the bad sides of each one, and maybe a little bit of a hierarchy, ideally, if you can. Follow these through a pathway, it would be great. So maybe we'll take a look at these, show you some examples, and hopefully you'll pick up a few things of how you can improve your game on the defensive side, because after all, it's all about hitting and not getting hit, and that's the important part when it comes to the scoreboard in sport. You don't want to get hit, you want to get your scores on the board and not the other way around.
And before we get started, we just have to let people know it's a bit challenging for us today. It is 30 degrees plus and warmer up here, and the laptop is not loving the idea of trying to run at that kind of temperature. So unfortunately, we might have the occasional delay, the occasional lag, but we'll see how things go and hopefully it'll get us through to the end. So do you want to start with our initial hierarchy or the way that we were shaping this up, Richie? And you might just run through that.
Yeah, so I came up with this little graph a couple of weeks ago just as we were looking through the defensive side of things. And initially I was thinking number 1 for me was like footwork and avoid. And then myself and Adrian had a chat about it, and he said direct counter, and I was like, oh yeah, light bulb moment. It's like the direct counter is initially the first way you can stop your opponent from attacking you, because it allows you to intercept the opponent with a direct counter attack, and then not only do you stop them from attacking you ideally, but you get a scoring opportunity for yourself. So that's before we even get to defending. That's option number 1, and that's the way you can almost turn the tide immediately. Then after that we have footwork. So this is avoiding using your feet, and the important thing here is you must be on balance. So this allows you to fire back essentially, and this is sparring 101, as we said, hitting without getting hit. Then next we have a little bit of head movement. So this is more than likely going to be at that closer range with hands.
Almost
so
always hands range.
Yeah, it allows you to fire back with this hand range. But you got to be careful because we have kicks at play as well. So you don't want to lean too much. So you don't want to be taking the skills you see from boxing in terms of their head movement too much. You got to have a bit of a hybrid there. Then we have blocking, and we spoke about this before. Blocking is almost like a last-ditch effort of not getting hit, because you're behind essentially, and the person who initiates is that step ahead if you have to block, cover up essentially. So then we have leaning as well. So we go through. There's good and there's bad to leaning. It really depends on the situation, but the big thing you got to be aware of is when we lean back, there is a big potential for your opponent to come forward again. And because we have kicks at play, it's fine if you just have hands, because if you come out of range of hands, there's nothing else at play unless they step forward, which allows you to step back. But because legs are obviously longer than hands, this is not ideal in all cases for us. And hopefully we'll see some examples of the good and bad of each of these. But just as a question, what's your opinion on this as a hierarchy, Adrian? Do you think that you should follow it through ideally 1 to 5? Or do you think it's a bit more interplay?
Do you know what, the way I would use it or think of it is in terms of if you're looking back with a fighter after a match and you're looking at, well, what went on, you know, what you're looking at is if a person used their footwork to avoid, was there the opportunity to get a counter score? Was there an opportunity to take that counter attack on the first intention? So as the person delivered that initial shot, was there a missed opportunity to deliver a counter attack or a direct counter? If you moved, was there a counter taken afterwards, or did you moved and avoided, and you made yourself safe, but you maybe conceded ring space without putting a threat back or a challenge back at your opponent? If we come to then the head movement, and in particular staying with hands, it's like, well, okay, did your head movement allow you to get to maintain your ring space or to avoid being hit? Or as exchanges go with hands, did it mean that you didn't get hit much or hard? So it's that kind of thing. So it really allows us to look at, was there a better option? And generally speaking, we'd look at it like when you get back to the end towards that lean, like a lean could be something that's done really well and with good purpose. So someone is taking a blindside turning kick and you lean or roll it back, and then you come back in with hands. That could be a fantastic approach. But if what the lean does is it pins you on your back foot, at the edge of the ring, and means that the next shot hits you, well, the lean wasn't a great choice then. So it just gives us a way to kind of, have a system to go back and look over a match that's happened, or something that someone's doing in training, and say, look, is there another option here that might be better? So, maybe it's not a strict 1 to 5 in every scenario.
Always it depends, isn't it?
So we love
because
that one.
it's a dynamic. Our sport is a dynamic game.
Yeah.
So like, there's no like 1 + 1 = 2, and that's like standard set. Anything that's dynamic, there's no absolute. When it comes to solutions, so that's the beauty of it all, really, isn't it? And that's why it's an interesting game for us who love it, because there's no absolutes.
So for the novices and the mums and dads in the crowd, let's have a look at what we mean by all of these things, because it's one thing you and I saying these, we know most people understand what we mean right away, but when we have a few examples, it's just a little bit easier to see it done well, to see where it doesn't work, and then we can have a chat through the opportunities that present. So the first one was, again, that direct counter.
Yeah, what I really like about this one is it basically sways the tide into your advantage really quick. So you see here, Carl Van Roon from New Zealand puts a stop on Davide Massinho. So Davide initiates the attack, and initially straight direct counter, straight down the line, puts a stop on Davide, and now the advantage sways onto Carl's side.
Yeah, absolutely. And here we have Jamie Williams and Vitaly Solovay, and we can see that the front leg counter, so meeting Vitaly on the way in, and then from the opposite point of view, Vitaly stepping outside of Jamie's leg as the kick is thrown. So here and there we have a lean followed by a direct counter, really, because the lean has invited Jamie to throw the follow-up attack, and Vitaly's come through with the direct counter.
Yeah, they'll interlink for sure. Yeah,
this is not from our ITF, but the Russian 57 Ostamik, super counter fighter. Like the shots that he throws are fantastic, and this one is maybe the signature one that was all over Instagram. But it's been set up. Shot. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there's a lot of movement and preceding movement and a lot of back and forth that leads this, that invites that front leg shot for the direct counter. And I think one of the things we have to say about direct counters is that they work best when the defensive fighter dictates what the attacker is going to throw. So if you're waiting to react, it just isn't going to happen. And it's the reason for me that it's at the top of the hierarchy, is because it actually takes a lot of pre-planning. It involves leading, inviting, setting lures or bait, and inviting the shot in that you want to counter, that you have preloaded. It's in the traps, it's ready to go. And the difficulty is, if you're hoping that you will just react instinctively and perfectly to a shot that's presented by an opponent, you just don't, unless they're very predictable. So if it happens to be that they keep picking up their front leg in the same way, you will twig it, even subconsciously, and you'll probably, prepare a counter that's effective. But if your opponent is varied and they have range in what they do, you'll probably just be wrong. Even if there's only two things that they can do, you'll probably still guess wrong at least 50% of the time. And, as people have said, when someone is throwing a reverse turning kick counter, it's along the lines of they only need to get it right once. But it's the same with the attack. I mean, if they get their attack right, you're sitting on your backside wondering what went wrong. Whereas if you're inviting it and you know what you've invited what you were looking for, it just increases your odds of success.
Yeah, and I think that for me, that's the reason for the almost the hierarchy of 1 to 5, because if you look at direct counter and footwork, like you said, the defensive side is actually setting this up and they're actually in the driving seat making it happen based on the cues that they see, etc. Head movement is a little bit more kind of in play in the moment, and then block and lean very often are almost you being reactive to the initial attack. So it's a good way of looking at it as well.
So let's jump into that footwork, and we can have a look at the kind of things that the good footwork allows you to do. Here we go.
Yeah, I think with the footwork as well, and you alluded to it earlier, Adrian, is not giving up space if you can, ideally. So this is actually myself here in blue. Just a little, it's comfortable to do when you're 4-0 lead, to be honest. But
yeah,
and that's the thing. People are a little bit more reckless towards an end of a match, and you can get away with some of these things. But the key is always having your feet under you. Again, I think Thomas here in blue is in the lead, and his opponent is chasing him. So that always gives you almost like an easier way of pulling it off.
But equally, yeah, what the footwork is doing is it's moving you out of the imminent threat of the shot. But in the same way as, like, as Julio's backed up into the corner here, it's invited in. And this one with Maxime, like Maxime's stretched for it, and Julio's just made a little bit of a sidestep to put himself out of range of it. The goal in the footwork is definitely to try to pull the person off of the line and to invite them to take a riskier shot next, which gives you a better opportunity maybe at a direct counter or an avoid encounter.
Definitely. And here's a training clip as well from Alameen working with some other world champions in Ireland summer camp. And you can see that the most important thing here is you can almost interlink your training with the understanding of where you need to move to on balance based on the kind of the motor cues that your partner shows. So you almost subconsciously take in what potentially will be the shot that they throw based on how their body moves and things like that. And this only comes from being in there. So it's just a very great example here of somebody trying to hit you and you're just essentially moving in a space that you both agree on. That's a very simple exercise that will really, really help your ability to move and not get hit while reading the options that are available as well.
Yeah, and that's it. And the options that you project to your opponent become very important then as well. So, if you have a very side-facing stance, or you pull your back leg even behind you a little bit, if you're dropping your front shoulder, you'll start to invite this over the blind side shot. If you're opening up your stance, you're moving to your partner's open side, that back leg turning kick becomes more of an option. And, even as you're cornering an opponent, what side of the ring you leave more open. Like, they're not going to try to escape into the narrow side that puts them close to your front leg. Yeah. They're going to go to the open side, which means you kind of know where they're going. And we have to use that to make it more likely to get our next one. So bringing us into close distance with the hands, let's have a little look at some head movement. And again, this does typically happen when we've arrived, as with the background image there, to fisticuffs.
Yeah. Again, great shot from Carl. We already seen this one. Adam Shelley, world champion multiple times, is a master at this, and I think it's almost a nice one to have if you have that body type as well of limbs, we say. So you can get in nice and close and use the head movement and lean and mix it up. Himself and Magomed here go back and forth, cracker of a fight. But yeah, two guys who are looking to get the hands and very comfortable at that close range. But it allows both people to punch and fire back when their opponent is firing. And most of the time it will be more of a neutral position where both of you guys can land if it's at play, but you just got to be aware of the kicks as well, so you don't want to be leaning too excessively or running out of space too much. Yeah, and you can see there where Thomas kind of gets to the point where at the end of this clip he's doing quite well keeping his head forward, and like the principle you generally have when you're teaching is like keep the head over the midline or forward. And when the head ends up behind that midline, like here with Thomas, it's like, oh, okay, now I'm leaning and I'm in trouble because I have to get back enough to make use of it. But both with Adam and now here with Alameen, we see some very, very good examples where even when they're carrying to hands themselves, they're bringing the head off the line of counterattack. And, it makes that little bit more difficult for the opponent to find a good line on the punch. So you don't have to move the head crazy amount either. No. So you don't. It's just a little bit, just a slide of a glove really. But the key with all of these guys is as they move their head, they're also firing. So you don't want to move your head and then fire. You want to do it simultaneously. And, a common mistake that's made, I think, by an awful lot of people in the beginning is when they start to move their head, they follow it. So the head leads the feet.
And so you end up kind of drifting around in this circle where you're just outside a range of with the hands, as opposed to, again, keeping the body slightly inclined forward and letting the head, move from side to side in a way that's getting you just outside of the hard contact part of the hand. So even sometimes it's enough that the glove kind of skims. You might be conceding a point, but if you lean so far that you can't come back, it's it's no good either. So the head movement that we're talking about, the head movement that we're talking about at this stage is about spoiling and getting you an opportunity to get back with the next good punch on that line. And we often see this like with the blitz, where if a person's very, very fast with the blitz, it's like, don't even try to defend like with this. Like, just make sure your head isn't in the line of that hand. And it's often enough, because the person then just shoots past your head and you're like, oh, okay, we're here now. So having that ability to keep as long as you're not too upright or sitting back in your stance, you should have the ability to float the head left and right and make some use of that. The other thing that hurts, obviously, the head movement game is the second you're in a side fighting stance, you can't use it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And as well as kind of like what you mentioned there, as well as what I like about this is, for our sport specifically, compared to like Wacko, your points must be very, very clear when you're punching. So it's not going to be the case where all of these shots are landing in a competitive match. Usually it's going to be the very, very clear one. So that's why the head movement is useful, because it just, like you said, gets you away from that clear one. Chances are when you throw back, it might not land anyway, because it needs to be a very clear distinction of, okay, there was an advantage there for somebody, or it was super, super clear. Usually if it's just a flurry and both people are exchanging, the referees generally won't reward that on either side. They won't like click every single shot thrown. It has to be super, super clear. So that's the purpose of the head movement as well.
So then we have what happens when all else fails. The head hasn't moved, the feet haven't moved. You just hope that the hands will move and get themselves, or more likely, the hands are already in a covering position. So this is where, you'll often have people say, look, keep your hands up. But wherever you happen to have your guard, and a very pronounced one from Antti here, but wherever you have your guard, it should be covering the most likely threats.
But Antti's one actually worked well there, because he was able to stop the initial shot and get in himself. So like we said, if you can link these various ways of defending up, it can be very useful. But the big problem with blocking is you just don't want to be that step behind. Like we see Katja here is that step ahead of Josephine every single time. Because she's essentially blocking every shot, which allows Katja to move on to the next shot while she's blocking.
Correct. Yeah, it's not interrupting or Katja's momentum. So the block is just allowing Katja to hit a pad. And the one thing that we know for sure that Katja can do is, if she hits a pad, she can hit it again. So she's just basically going into a sequence. And we can see there a little bit of a panic response, and anyone would have it once your back gets turned. Like, if your back gets turned, you're going to cover, because it's the best thing that it's probably all that you're left. So we move from a kind of a positive blocking here, where it's like, no, you're going to have to find somewhere to go, Colin. You're going to have to go to the head. And now it lets Antti take that, because it takes longer for the front leg to come down. It lets him get in there. And here we can see lots of examples with Josephine being kind of caught a bit flat-footed, and her hands are saving her from getting, from some of the scores, but it's not interrupting the momentum.
Yeah, definitely, and that's the key. Blocking is a last-ditch effort, really. The best you'll ever get from it is a neutral position, where they don't score and you don't get hit hard, basically, but you can't shoot back. Where this shot actually landed in real time. This angle doesn't show it very well, but Jonathan got his hand up well, and maybe not all the judges would have scored it based on that. So it's like essentially like a great example of a last-ditch effort. Yeah,
definitely. So as we kind of finish with the idea of blocking, we get into this slightly more complicated version of leaning. And leaning has a lot of uses. There can be advantages to it. It's quite a natural thing to do. A good lean or shoulder roll can take you out of a blindside turning kick or a hacks kick or something. But if you aren't going anywhere productive from that, or if it doesn't let you catch the person before the foot comes to the ground, we in trouble.
Yeah, don't be hanging around on the edge leaning, basically. You want to be like levels above your opponent to get away with that. And we're going to see some examples of this here.
That's actually something very important to kind of point out, that leaning is that the taller you are relative to your opponent, the more viable leaning is as an option. Definitely don't want to do it as the smaller guy.
So here you'll see a lot of leaning against Colin because he just got some crazy amount of range on his legs. So you see it happen a lot, but it's not good for Antti to be kind of chilling here on the edge because he's reacting. And here's an example of where leaning gets you a big trouble, especially on the edge where you run out of space.
Yeah, and he doesn't have the option to kind of change the distance again here. Like, he has to get forward, and he's missed his chance there. Once Colin has started to spin and Antti hasn't gone forward, he's missed the opportunity to get out of that corner.
Yeah, and chances are, like, you see the lean here from David Kerr. He's just trying to not get hit while still coming forward. But it's chances are, if you stay in the same position while you lean, they'll probably get you on the second shot anyway. And that's kind of what we see a lot. Now, it does work sometimes, and you'll get away with it, but it is a risky game to play, I feel.
Definitely, and it's even almost the same shot again from Colin here.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Again, David Kerr, actually. Who is a master on the other side. Then we've had him on the show, and you can see how good he is at actually defending and moving. But when you give your opponent that opportunity to kind of initiate and you just wait and lean, trying to come back in, especially against somebody with a reach like Colin, it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I always use the analogy that if anybody who trains on pads, the most common thing that you do when building a combination on the pads is the person either moves back or moves forward, and probably moves back in a straight line. So to put someone in their comfort zone in the sparring ring, the easiest thing that you can do for them is move back in a direct line as a response to what they throw, because they probably naturally, organically flow into a combination from there. So leaning kind of falls in that wheelhouse. Movement can, as in if you just shift back, it can also fall into that. But once I have that, like, I'll move back, and leaning usually follows a bit of moving back first anyway. So it often happens that you move back till you can't, and now all you can do is lean. But once you're in that position, it's letting the person throw those, like, turning kicks into reverse turning kicks, or the side kick into the reverse turning kick, into the turning kick, into the whatever, that, we're kind of used to throwing those with a compliant pad holder in a straight line. And we'd always say, hey, this stuff doesn't work in reality, except when it does, which is
when somebody plays.
Yeah, exactly. That's
it. So, like, all of these things, as we've seen, they can work, but there's also risks. So you got to just be aware of those risks. And as we said, if you can use them in conjunction, that's good. And that's very much the case of lean. If you can lean and then use your footwork to get you off that line to an angle, then maybe you're going to be able to get away with it a bit more. Whereas if you just lean and stay, then you're going to be in trouble and you're just a sitting duck.
Like, one of the most common places we'll see something like leaning is when a person is circling to the back and then they kind of just roll the shoulder and continue to their back, so that the idea is that the shot over the blind side continues, misses, and you're further, because you maintained your movement, you're now further to the back, and the other person has to try and recover from a shot that was going in the other direction, find this new line, and it gives you a chance to come in. So as much as we have things like that at the bottom of the hierarchy as such, they each have their appropriate time and are useful in their appropriate time. Even blocking is one of those things that, if you consider interfering with the leg with the front hand, in terms of using your guard.
Parrying.
Yeah, so that kind of, the parrying side of things that, that lets you enter, is far more productive. And equally, just covering, can be okay. Like, a strong block sometimes, can be okay. So if there's something like a hacks or something, and you can actually lean into it, or you get your head covered so that it's like, it's not coming through, it's forcing them to bounce down and expose their blind side. So every now and again,
and then you get a bit of forward momentum yourself.
Yeah, every now and again a block could be useful, but it's often accidental. It's just a case of, like, training blocking requires training the person typically to not move, and that's the problem. Whereas if we start to, like, stretch it into things like jamming movements and things like that, then it becomes a bit more practical.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway from all of this. No matter what side of the defensive game you favour, it's all about ideally you being the proactive side, not being the person who's reactive and waiting for them to throw and you do something. It's like we said earlier, that you want the advantage to be on your side, where you have an opportunity to fire back, interrupt them ideally, and fire back would be great. So if you can do that, that's where you're going to see the best benefit. And you got to be, even on the defensive side, if you're just sitting and waiting, the advantage lies with the attacker, of course. So you got to have that on, flip the script, and you almost set the rhythm, set the traps and things like that. And then that's where you're going to see the the elite counter fighters and the defensive fighters be most productive.
They'll shine. So folks, what do you think? What suits your own style? Which of those 5 do you like to use yourself, and how many of them do you use in your defensive repertoire? How many of them do you train? So please just hit us up in the comments. Let us know on social media what you like, what you don't like, and better yet, let us know why. And maybe we'll play on some of those ideas and take them forward to next week's Fight Chat Friday.
Absolutely. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe if you're new to the channel, not to miss any of our Taekwondo content. And we'll catch you in the next one.
Bye now.